Next up, Matt and Svan. Have either of you seen the Vikings TV show, and what are your thoughts on it? I'm talking about the one that started in 2013, starring Travis Fimmel as Ragnar. Svan, commence your rant about shoulder pelts.
I can honestly say, for anybody who might be surprised or not, I don't know. I have only seen the first episode of the Viking show. I've never seen any more out of that than the first episode. I think that the battle scene and the showing of Lord Odin, like kind of moving about with the crows around and the ravens, a lot of that imagery, it's pretty cool. I thought it was pretty cool, but I heard the story kind of deviates, and I never really just got into it. I never had a chance to. And then by the time I was possible to do it, I just didn't have the time, with work and homeschooling children and things like that. There's not a lot of time for things. It's the same with the Northmen. I haven't seen the Northmen either. So a lot of people, especially at my work, they're like, "Oh, you had to have seen this, right? You've had to have seen this." And I'm like, "No, I haven't. I haven't seen it at all." So I think, I don't know. Again, my rant would be simply this. It's kind of like those books that inspire people to learn more, and then they grow away from the fan fiction of it, the shoulder pelting, the black paint, the living like a barbarian, and then they come to a realization later on, no, their ancestors weren't like that at all. But other people, no, this is just something that they're clinging to. It's an attitude again. It's that kind of like, I'm not kneeling for nobody. I'm going to put these runes on my face and get a mohawk ponytail and go to Ren fairs. And that's kind of all they do. We're in a different league. We're not the same. I'm being nice about it.
Well, I saw, so again, on that first episode, seeing Odin appear in visions as a god and not just as some silly character, but as being treated religiously on the battlefield with the ravens, that was really special. There were things about it that was the first time that a lot of us saw that depicted in media in a religious context. And that was neat. There was things about it that were kind of cool. I watched way more of it than I should have. But I think I've seen about every episode of it or whatever. And it's really historically inaccurate. And I'm not just talking about the merging of characters from different places and times into one narrative. I get that. But there is this modern conception of Vikings that they were these primitive, barbarous, filthy, only wore black and primitive furs and were completely uncivilized. And again, it's the idea to juxtapose, oh, well, Christians in civilized Europe was this way. Well, the Vikings have to be the opposite of that. And that's not how it was. Anyone who's studied about Vikings for any amount of time, I would go so far as to say a majority of Viking Age artifacts are personal hygiene items, are like trimmers for beards and mustaches and stuff to get crap out of your ears and like stuff and combs, a lot of combs, because there was a long hair culture. So the combing and braiding and taking great care with your appearance. Vikings loved bright colored clothing and being clean. One of the things that they were, because they did bathe and clean themselves regularly, made them an outcast from other parts of Europe where that wasn't something you did. And then when they went into just this moral license of, here, let's have a three-way with my wife and all this other just degeneracy, because again, the Christians had morality, so the Vikings needed to be the opposite. That's not true. And it's disrespect. They portrayed our faith through that concept and our values through that concept in a way that's very disrespectful to real things that we believe. So yeah, and when you looked at the Gothar, they're these strange, mutants that are deformed and
I saw it on YouTube.
Yeah, and it's gross and it's disrespectful, and it's just really inaccurate, and so it made it very uncomfortable to watch. But it did inspire people to look into their heritage and look into our ancestral faith and look into that. And I'm sure some amazing people have come home to Ausatru because of it inadvertently. Next up, also for you, Svan. Can you explain what is the tripartite?
Tripartite. The tripartite is an Aryan religious component. I think it is in every Aryan religion, and it is worth looking at. And the best way to look at it for us, and this is based off of observation of our faith in literature, poetry, and even observation from outsiders, from Tacitus to the Eddas, the idea of the three presenting or being focused upon as of the gods. And I'm speaking right now mainly in the Teutonic sense. Tacitus spoke clearly that the Germanic people honored Mars, Mercury, and he mentioned divine Hercules. And so, again, he mentioning these three. We clearly see in the Eddas, there is the usage of the king that is high king, just as high king, and the third. Again, this is establishing the tripartite. We see it with Adam of Bremen mentioning in Uppsala that the Swedes have Thor in the center, and then they have the furious one and the fruitful one next to him. And so a lot of people get caught up in this idea that they try to boil back Aryan religion into a sky daddy, earth mommy, or sometimes they don't even do the earth mommy. But they don't understand that our ancestors were polytheistic. I think this is a Christian reaction to try to boil the gods down into singularities. And what we see, first and foremost, is the functioning of a triplicate. We see this with Lord Woden himself as being a tripartite in Odin, Vili, and Ve. And I think that each of the tripartites, based off of my religious observations and Aryan religions and studying them, is that each of the tripartites, I'm not saying this is how the gods work. What I am saying is that this is most certainly how it is kind of framed out, whether it's a cultural representation of the powers of the gods or whether the gods are telling us this is how they function. The point of it is that there is always seeming to be a dynamic lord. So one, I would say the tripartite is like three thrones, and one is dynamicism, the other is stasis, and the third one is catalytic. So we have the one that can go up and down, the one that can go around the edges or left and right, and the one that maintains position. And how that plays out for a lot of people is different everywhere. And then you have even more confusion when you start to look at different Aryan cultures and you try to not fit the gods into perhaps their dominions or thrones, but try to fit the gods into other gods. And I think that's where we get a lot of confusion and fallacy. But the tripartite is clearly Aryan, and it doesn't always follow in the same patterns that we always think of. It's unique to the culture. If you look at the Etruscans, who called their gods Aesir, they had a tripartite, but it was a singular. It was the head of their gods, the masculine, and his two wives, in essence, was their tripartite. And for them, the gods, all the gods, and what made the gods was their ability to throw lightning. Again, I think this is a very Hellenic concept of the power of divinity. But there is a tripartite. The Hellenics, like the Romans and the Greco-Romans, have a tripartite. The Slavs, a tripartite. The Gauls, a tripartite. The Germanics, a tripartite. Going all the way back to the Bhagavad Gita and into when the Vedic movement into India, there is a tripartite. It is a huge pinnacle structuring of the heavenly fathers in a way. And again, it also seems to change. Sometimes the heavenly fathers have, like, the culture will emphasis more on stasis as an important factor of divinity. And so they'll focus on that throne and the Lord that fills it.
And none of these have anything to do with Yahweh. Yahweh is not Odin. Yahweh is not Zeus. Yahweh is not any of these other deities. Yahweh is not Lu from the Irish Odin, Lu. Yahweh is not them.
Others will focus on dynamicism and the Lord that fills it. Others will go with catalysm. And sometimes I think it moves. I think that the Swedes had Thor in the center of their tripartite at that time of year with the function of giving honor where honor was due. So I don't think it was a singular thing. Like, you can't have Tyr or Thor have any sort of honorific position that outsways Odin. And I think this is greatly emphasized by people who are trying to take polytheism and turn it into, like, Shivaism in Hindu, or Vishnuism that is becoming very popular in Hinduism now. Boiling things down and kind of making this quasi monotheism. And perhaps they're thinking that it'll attract more people home, but I think it leads down the improper usage and understanding of the way our ancestors interacted with the multiplicity of the gods.
Yep, quasi-monotheism. Hinduism is monotheistic. Go ask the Hindu yogis. They tell the Christians the same fucking thing. I am often perplexed when Christians say that we worship different gods. I jokingly say to them that we worship the same one God as the Christians. The Christians worship God in 3 forms, but we Hindus, who like more variety, worship the same one God in 330 million different forms. Odin is not Yahweh, dickhead.
Absolutely. Real quick, it didn't show up, but I've been reading the chat. John, you talked about the. So John said a long time ago, an old friend of his was telling him about Odinism and how it was different from monotheism. And he was like, we don't pray and beg the gods for stuff. We let them encourage us. I think that that is a overly simplistic way of expressing what we do in our faith. And I think that that attitude was really common at a earlier stage in the modern development of our faith. When again, it was defining Al-Satru by how different it was than another religion, as opposed to defining Al-Satru of its own terms. We absolutely pray. We don't beg our gods for stuff, but we do ask for things that are beyond our power. And one of the things we often ask for is them encouraging us or inspiring us or those type of things. We don't, our prayers aren't always asking for things. Very often they're prayers of thanksgiving or of, just honoring the gods at different times. Sometimes we ask things. Very often we offer things. That earlier attitude tends to be from folks that treat the gods as concepts and archetypes and not as gods. When you interact with a god, you pray. Just like some of the other conversation about bowing or kneeling or anything else, if one of our literal real gods appears before you, you take a knee before a god. And if you wouldn't, you're not truly putting yourself in that scenario. So yeah, the next question from Finn Wraith, what do you think of Wicca? Svan, what do you think of Wicca?
Oh, wow.
You! Hey, don't be mad at us, because we landed on you. A better sorcerer would have been able to prevent that.
He doesn't mean that, do you?
Get out of my sight and don't come back!
Walking through M.
Shut up.
Caballeros del Zodiaco, alma de oro.
Volar hasta el cielo, siempre en alto. La verdad se sabrá con el triunfo del mañana. Alumbra el camino, brillará esa luz, es la de Soldier Drill. Con fuerza y con valor, activando el cosmos, el mundo brillará. Tan solo di que sí, Sensei. Sabrás conmigo que es la libertad. Vive tus sueños y llegarás al Sensei. Sabrás conmigo que es la libertad. Vive tus sueños y llegarás al fin.
Idiots! I'm surrounded by